In this video, I want to get my Volkswagen Fox running and maybe driving. A couple of months ago, I bought this Volkswagen Fox for just £700 with the dream of transforming it from a slow, unassuming commuter car into an absolute sleeper which can smoke modern day hot hatches. The plan to achieve this goal was to fit this 220 horsepower 1.8T engine from a Polo GTI into the car, which should make this little Fox a heck of a lot faster. Now, this plan was going to be especially hard because before this build, I had never touched a VAG car in my life, and on top of that, I've only ever done one engine swap in the past. In the previous video, we managed to get the GTI engine out of a donor Polo and into the Fox, but the main reason why we couldn't get any further with the build was because the wiring looms needed modification, and that was going to take a couple of weeks. But ladies and gentlemen, I am excited to show you the loom is now done, so we technically have everything we need to get this car driving. But before we focus on getting this car running, the first thing we've got to do is a little bit of engine maintenance. A lot of you guys pointed out in the comment section of the previous video on the Fox that I just whacked this engine in without cleaning anything or doing any maintenance. So let's get those jobs done first and then get the engine back in and focus on getting it running. Now, the first port of call to do all of the maintenance jobs I want to do is to get the engine out of the Fox, which is relatively simple. I just waxed off the wheels and then undid the engine mounts. So the first bit of maintenance I wanted to do was to replace the clutch with a new one, so I had to remove the gearbox. That's one gearbox. I could then get the engine on the crane and remove the old clutch. There is material on that, so it did have a little bit of life left. New pressure plate, old pressure plate. You can see sort of the difference. That's what I mean, like the new clutches have lots of like thick material on them, don't they? Yeah. Now, to get the new clutch fitted, I've got to use something called a clutch alignment tool, which, as you might guess, makes sure the clutch is aligned when you fit it. And once lifting up the whole clutch assembly to the flywheel, I can then bolt it down using a cross pattern just to make sure that everything stays as flat as possible. And once the clutch was installed, I could then move on to fitting a new set of spark plugs. After taking out the old ones, I could put in the new NGK spark plugs. And I also wanted to do a quick oil change. If you spill oil on the floor and you've got a cat at home, use some cat litter, chuck it on the oil, it like sucks it all up. Right, let's give that a go. There we go.
There we go.
So we have done the oil, the spark plugs, the clutch. The last thing I want to replace is the auxiliary belt. We need to loosen off the belt and then also take off the AC condenser because we are not running AC in the Fox because it doesn't have any AC ports. So to remove the auxiliary belt, I had to grab a 15mm spanner and pull the tab to loosen off the tensioner, and then I can just pull the auxiliary belt straight off. And once that was done, I could then remove the AC condenser, which was just being held on by 3 bolts. And then it was on with the new auxiliary belt. Right, so all of the maintenance on the 1.8T GTI engine has been done. A lot of you might have noticed we didn't do the timing belt or the water pump, and that is because both of those two things have been done relatively recently. If you look in the service booklet, you can see it was like 10,000 miles ago, so it's not really necessary that we need to do that on this engine. Now, we can move on to, if you follow me around, the looms that I showed you at the beginning of this video. We've got the body loom and the engine loom. Obviously, the engine loom is just going to go on the engine, and then the body loom needs to go into the engine bay of the Fox. Now, there are 2 main jobs that we need to do before we can get the engine in and connect it up to those looms. And those 2 jobs are, Firstly, the gear selectors. These are the standard Fox gear selectors and they won't work with the 1.8T, so we need to take those out and replace those with the gear selectors that are in the Polo currently. And we also need to do a bit of fiddling around with the fuel system. To cut a long story short, the Fox's standard engine and the engine bay only has one fuel line. It is what we call a returnless system, so it only has one fuel line going into the engine. Whereas the 1.8T, as you can see here, has two sort of ports for fuel lines, a feed and a return. So basically, we need to make the Fox's engine bay have two fuel lines in it when it only has one at the minute. So the solution is the Polo again. These are our two fuel lines right here, the return and the feed. We need to basically take the whole fuel system out of the Polo and put it in the Fox. You can sort of start to see now why I really wanted this Polo, because it sort of fixes absolutely every problem we're coming across with this engine swap. So yeah, if you're on board, we've got to do those two jobs. But firstly, let's do the looms.
You know that I won't lie.
So Jav and I started by connecting up the engine loom to the engine. Now, this is a really simple process. You literally just have to plug in all of the plugs into the correct places. So it's stuff like the injectors, the coil packs, numerous different sensors, all of these different parts of the engine need to be plugged in. So after getting the engine loom completely fitted and everything plugged in, I could then move on to the body loom. Again, similarly to the engine loom, all you have to do with the body loom is plug all of the plugs into the correct places, but it is a little bit more tricky because you have to think about the routing of the wires and also just keeping the engine bay neat and tidy.
I'm thinking it's for life with you.
Whilst getting the body loom fitted, I also made sure to get the scuttle panel and the ECU mounted up as well. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't yet subscribed, make sure you do so because it massively supports the channel and it allows me to keep making you content just like this. So we are making some good progress. The engine loom is on the engine and everything is connected up, and the body loom is now fitted. This was a bit of a task, but because the loom was sort of labeled, I could figure out where most of the stuff went. We started to get the scuttle panel fitted back in, and also the windscreen wiper motors have been fitted as well. And yeah, there is not much left to do with the body loom. Obviously, there is gonna still be a lot of stuff to connect up when the engine goes in, but for now, we can move on to the next two jobs, which, as I said earlier, is the gear selectors and the fuel system. So I firstly decided to tackle swapping over the gear selectors. Now, the first job when doing this was to unbolt the Polo's selector from inside the car. Once all the nuts were undone and it was loose, I could then get the car up on some axle stands and remove it from underneath. But to do so, I had to take off some under trays and also the exhaust heat shield. That is a great success. One gear selector out of a Polo. Now I need to get the gear selector out of the Fox and change them over. So as for removing the Fox's gear selector, it is the exact same process. Unbolt it from the inside and then take it out from underneath. So after removing the Fox's gear selector and heat shield in one go, I could quickly get out the angle grinder to remove the old rear section of the Fox's exhaust, because as I'm sure a lot of you might have guessed, I'm not going to be running a standard Fox exhaust on this GTI engine setup, so that had to go. And once that was done, I could then fit up the Polo GTI's gear selector to the Fox, and yes, ladies and gentlemen, it is a straight fit. And that is because, as you can see, the studs are in exactly the same position on each gear selector, making this a lot easier. So once the GTI gear selector was in place, I could then get the car back down, get inside, and bolt it up. So that is the gear selector from the Polo fitted into the Fox. It is underneath this heat shield now. You can't see it, but I have since put on the brace and the under tray on the left side, but the right-hand side under tray I have not put on because we are now going to do the fuel system swap over from the Polo to the Fox, and it's all of sort of this stuff here. So the under tray needs to stay off. But let's give it a go. So the first thing to do is to disconnect and remove the fuel system from the Polo, because that is what we'll be swapping into the Fox. Now, it is almost as important to wear eye protection and gloves when working with fuel systems as it is to make sure you run a vehicle history check using CarVertical before you buy any car. Luckily for me, on my Fox's report, there were 3 green ticks and the report is all clear. But when I was checking the report before buying the car, I found that the previous owner had only owned the car for 2 months, which raised my alarm bells, and this information actually allowed me to renegotiate and get some money off the car. But I probably wouldn't have bought the Fox if the report had looked like this Fox's report, because as you can see, there is an amber warning light for mileage. If we scroll down on this report, we can see the mileage graph, and this shows us that the mileage was definitely rolled back here, which is pretty dodgy, and because of this, I would stay clear of this car. So CarVertical allows you to have an all-in-one report of any car's history, which is so important when making a big purchasing decision, because it allows you to negotiate more effectively and it helps you to identify the money pits and stay clear of them. So to check any car with CarVertical, click the link in the description of this video and use the code JACK20 at the checkout for a 20% discount on the price of a CarVertical report. And not only do you get some money off, you also get to help out the channel, so it is a win-win. With all of that said, let's get this fuel system connected up. Now, we have got the Polo fuel system out of the Polo, and you can see the blue line there is the return. The clear one, I think, is a breather, although I'm not sure, and the black one is the feed. So that gives us the fuel system we need to run the 1.8T. So before fitting the Polo's fuel system into the Fox, I firstly had to remove the Fox's standard fuel feed line. After the standard feed line was out, I could then get the Polo's fuel system and feed it all the way through this little section in the engine bay, which is a lot easier said than done. And once feeding through the lines most of the way, I could get underneath the car and pull the lines through. So now that both the fuel feed and the return lines have been threaded through to the back, I can get them connected up. The fuel filter connects with our new fuel feed line, and the Fox's standard return line, which used to be connected to the fuel filter using this T-piece, can now connect to our new return line from the engine bay. And after finishing it up, this is what it looked like. So the fuel system in the Fox is now completely connected up. We have our return line there, and I'm going to leave it up there, and the feed now coming straight from the fuel filter all the way around. And yeah, these lines are now looking great. I need to put the under tray back on, but other than that, we are now ready to get this engine fitted into this car for the final time. So before getting the engine fitted, we firstly had to quickly whip off the subframe, because as I'm sure you all know by now, we can't fit this engine in with the subframe on. So once the subframe was off, we could then begin fitting the GTI engine into the Fox, using a technique I have recently become very familiar with, and that is of course lowering the car with the ramp over the engine and then bolting up the engine mounts once everything has been lined up. Once the engine was mounted in the engine bay, I could then get the car up on the ramp and start fitting the drive shafts. Now, these drive shafts aren't the standard Fox ones, and again, like a load of other parts of this build, they are from the Polo. It just goes to show how important having that donor car really is. So it was a little bit more of a fiddly job than I expected, but the drive shafts are now in. We can now move on to fitting the exhaust, which is going to come out from the turbo just here over the steering rack, and we're going to put that on first before we do the subframe, because I think it'll be a bit easier now the subframe is off. So exhaust, then subframe, then we can sort out connecting stuff up in the engine bay. Right, guys, I have just had a little thought. Why not try and fit the Milltech exhaust from the Polo onto the Fox? It would save us a lot of money trying to get an exhaust sorted for this. We may as well try it. Now, to be honest, I had no idea whether this exhaust was actually going to fit onto the Fox. The exhausts on the two cars look nearly identical. However, there was a lot of information online saying you can't actually swap them over. But to be honest, I just wanted to give it a go because these Milltech exhaust systems are really expensive, and being able to fit this system onto the Fox would save me a load of money, so I thought it was worth a shot. But just as I was trying to remove the exhaust from the Polo, someone turned up to give me a hand. A man has arrived. Hello mate, you right?
Came to swap for your Fox, if that's possible.
Oh, what, this?
Yeah. Oh, sorry for that. Should we swap?
It does look newer, to be fair.
Mate, this thing pulls like a train, I swear.
Is it 2 litre diesel?
I've got no clue. It's a rental.
Is it a rental? The fastest car in the world?
Hey, you got to move some engines around? Don't use your car. Use a rental.
It's only gone and snapped the bolt.
Oh. If you got an angle grinder here, I'll happily, if it's cutting, I'll happily do it.
Do you want to do some cutting?
Absolutely.
Okay, go on, I'll let you do some cutting.
Put me in, coach.
Well, we've subbed in Edwin to try and get this exhaust off.
I reckon I can get the whole V-band.
Oh, he's so good. That is so unbelievably on there. The exhaust definitely was unbelievably on there. Essentially what happened was the rear section and the mid section had seized together, and we were trying to loosen it off with the hammer, but it just wasn't working. Edwin came up with the idea to lower the rear beam so that we could maybe pull the whole exhaust out from the back, but that didn't work. So we just had to keep hammering.
Yes!
Oh my God.
Good stuff, man.
That took way too long.
A win is a win.
A win is a win. Do you know what? Do you know what would be even funnier though? If we did all of that and it doesn't fit.
It doesn't fit. Should we do a test fit?
Let's do a test fit. Right. So the reason why I did this was because it looked like it would fit. So if you go like that.
That's looking good.
It looks like it might work, you know. Yeah, let's give the rear section a test.
Ooh. A Volkswagen Fox doesn't have any right to have that, but that's pretty cool.
Look at it. Oh mate, this genuinely thing, I think it will fit.
I think that's gonna go. So
unfortunately, Edwin had to leave at this point, but I could still get the exhaust fitted to check that it would actually fit onto the Fox. So I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. The good news is that I think we'll be able to use this. The bad news is that it's going to need some modification because it doesn't just fit straight up. As you can see, this is it fitted and it is just way too long. None of the hangers line up. So there's the hanger up here, which doesn't really line up. Basically, it needs some modification, but we're still going to get the car running and driving. We just won't have an exhaust for the first drive, so that'll be quite fun. So let's take this off and then move on to the next job, which is the subframe. So after removing the rear section and the mid section of the Milltech exhaust, I could then temporarily cable tie up the downpipe and move on to the subframe. Now at this point, I feel like I have done this job more than a Volkswagen technician, but either way, we could get the subframe lifted up and bolted onto the chassis. So now the subframe was fitted, I could then get the final engine mount installed as well. And this basically just stops the engine from swaying back and forth. So everything underneath the car has now been done. Now we need to move on to everything in the engine bay. And the first thing I want to point out is these fuel lines. They fit on there so perfectly. It's like, obviously, this is the same platform, so it makes sense. We've got the engine from the Polo and the fuel lines from the Polo, so it obviously works, but it is just really satisfying to know that we can do this engine swap so easily. That on the Jazz was so much more work, so it's just very nice. We have obviously a few things to do here. Gear selectors need connecting up. We've got a load of plugs that need connecting up. We're going to have to sort through all of this, but once that's done, we can then move on to the radiator, the intercooler, bumper on, start it up, drive off. Sick sleeper. So I started off all of the jobs I needed to do in the engine bay by connecting up those fuel lines. And then I could fit the clutch slave cylinder, which for those of you who don't know is basically a hydraulic piston which is responsible for engaging and disengaging your clutch. It's basically what your left foot is controlling when you're pressing down and lifting up the clutch pedal. And fitting the slave cylinder then allowed me to bolt down and connect up the gear selector cables as well. And these cables connect to the GTI shifter which we installed earlier, and these of course allow you to select the gears. So once I had finished up with the gear selectors, I could then move on to plugging in the rest of the loom.
What you think? One shot to a lifetime. Give you my all, yeah. One shot, make it hot. One shot. I'm thinking it's for life with you. My heart is
The last thing to do to get the loom fully connected up was to fit the battery.
who knew we could end up super close. You want
Right, so everything has been connected up to the engine now apart from three things. We haven't put on the air filter, we haven't put on the intercooler or the boost piping, and we haven't put on the radiator or fitted any of the coolant system. However, that shouldn't matter with getting this engine started. We're going to run it naturally aspirated for the first start just to see if everything works. Now, we know that the engine runs because obviously we had it in the Polo, and in the previous video we took the Polo for a 0 to 60 run and the engine was great. However, the big question mark with this is whether the loom works. I've heard a lot of stories from friends of mine who have had Volkswagen looms made, and they seem to go wrong a lot with a custom wiring loom. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that this wiring loom works and the engine starts. So let's give it a go. 3, 2. What? That was the strangest first start I have ever experienced. What was it doing? Right, so we have found out what the problem is. Basically, I forgot to fit this sort of consortment of breather pipes, and essentially this will all connect up and stop our 180 from having loads of vac leaks and revving all over the place. So let's get this on and then give it another start. So after getting those breather pipes fitted, I could then try to start the car again. Right, take 2. She's min. That has fixed it. Okay, I am an idiot for forgetting that.
I'm stuck in space, got a daydream running through my brain every day.
Okay, so now we know the engine starts and runs fine, we can move on to fitting these remaining pieces of the puzzle. We have the boost piping and the air filter, the front bumper, the crash bar, the front panel, the radiator, and the intercooler. Now, the Polo's front panel is very different to the Fox's front panel. The Polo's one won't fit on the Fox, so in order to fit the Polo's radiator, which we need because it's a lot bigger than the Fox's radiator, we need to make the hole in the Fox's front panel bigger. So to do this, I firstly measure out how wide the Polo's radiator is, and I can then get out the angle grinder and make the hole in the Fox's front panel big enough to fit this radiator. And then I can drill some holes to help mount this radiator up. After that, I can then install the mounting brackets for the intercooler and get that mounted up as well. And once all of that is done, I can then get this new front panel fitted. So then the next job was to install and connect up all of the boost piping. And another thing we had to do here was bolt up the crash bar, which was sort of difficult because we had to remove some of the boost pipes and move the intercooler a little bit. So we really are getting close now. The final things I had to do was fit the scuttle panel, the windscreen wipers, the air filter, the front bumper, and then I could finally bleed the cooling system. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now very, very close to being able to take this car out for a drive. There is one last thing I want to do, and that is to do with the exhaust. We have this sort of cable-tied mess, which I showed you earlier on in the video, and I've shown this to a few of my friends who know about exhausts, and they have told me that those plastic cable ties will last all of about 5 minutes when I take this car out for a drive, because this gets very hot indeed. So I have come up with a little bit of a plan. We have the Milltech exhaust on the floor here, which, as we discovered earlier, doesn't fit the Fox, but actually some of it does. The rear section is too long and doesn't fit, but the midsection actually does fit. So if I can fit the midsection and cut this little bit off the rear section and fit that, it will sort of end as sort of like a downturned exhaust up here, and it will be away from the fuel tank and away from any brake lines. So that is the plan. Let's give it a try. So I could get the angle grinder out again to get this exhaust sorted. All I had to do was chop off that little part of the rear section, and once that was done, I could get the midsection fitted onto the car. And then I could fit on our little addition from the rear section to help it clear the rear beam. And after finishing this up, I think it looks much better, and it is definitely a better solution. Right, it is the big moment. I am itching with excitement to see if this thing moves. I'm going to get in it, start it, see if it rolls. If it does, that is a win. And then if it does do that, we'll be able to take it on a drive. So. Right, handbrake off. First gear, works. Oh my God, this thing wants to go. Reverse. We're working, it moves. Forward again. Oh, yes. Oh, listen to the turbo. I cannot stop myself from just laughing at this car. It is so ridiculous, but at the same time, I am so proud of myself. This is the first time I've really ever done an engine swap completely by myself without much help, to be honest. So I'm very proud of myself, and the car moves. It is gonna be, well, a very interesting drive, as you'll see in a second. But what I just love is how this engine bay is the only thing giving away this car. If I put that bonnet down, absolutely nothing on this car makes it look like it is fast whatsoever. It has standard everything on it. So it is a proper sleeper. But with all of that said, let's go and take this car out for our first drive. Right, so for this first drive, we've got Jav in the passenger seat. This is going to be pretty sketchy because obviously it has the Polo's power, but yeah, it's got like wobbly suspension.
None of the Polo's extra bits.
Yeah, it's made for going 60 miles an hour and nothing more. So starts literally on the button. Are you feeling confident?
Yeah, definitely not nervous.
The only other annoying thing, again, it's similar to the Jazz. This car has no temperature gauge, so I have no idea how hot it is. If it does overheat, there'll just be one red light that goes, I'm really hot.
I'm really hot.
Oh my God. Doesn't it feel so weird with that suspension?
Yeah.
Did you hear that pop?
Yeah. Oh.
This is mental.
The car moves, that's the main thing.
Yeah, it moves, but do you know what is weird? Like every time you change gear, like the car, like, do you feel it?
A little bunny hop.
It like... It's rubbish.
Jesus Christ.
This is definitely quicker than the Jazz, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
The Jazz is really fun because you've got like 8,500 RPM, but this is just like, you get the boost, you get the torque, it like properly puts you back in your seat.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know what that noise is.
We're hearing noises. Blah, blah, blah.
I can't express how unsafe it feels with these tyres, with this floaty suspension, with these brakes. It does not feel...
You are literally gripping the steering wheel so tight.
Yeah. Honestly, it's like, it's getting my adrenaline going a little bit.
Oh my god, it is not slow.
He's not slow at
It's
all.
not slow at all.
Well, we've got this van behind us who probably thinks, oh yeah,
Oh,
what is that
granny.
Volkswagen Fox doing? This thing is rapid!
Oh my god.
Oh my god, it's absolutely rapid turn. Oh, the suspension! Mate, this is scary.
Damn. It is rapid.
This thing is so quick. Well, I have to say, I am over the moon with the Fox GTI. This is probably the fastest car I've built on my channel. It's definitely faster than Boris. It's definitely faster than the Jazz, and it feels completely stupid to drive. It does make you very fearful for your life as well, which is quite fun. The suspension, the brakes, the tires, everything will need upgrading for me to actually be able to enjoy driving this car without being scared. If you want to see that, make sure to like and make sure to subscribe, because we have a lot of work coming on this car to make it more drivable, but also we are going to be sending it to the moon. 350 horsepower, I reckon, is doable with this. So make sure to stay tuned for that, and I'll catch you in the next one.